This is an equity member-led special edition podcast. It is the first in a random series of conversations with no fixed schedule, where I get to share with you awesome people from my network that advocate and champion on best practice in the creative industries, actively pursuing change or challenging the status quo on behalf of us freelancers and employees in this business we call show. And this is episode 1. And I'm talking today to John Carnegie, a theatre director and equity member and activist that I have known for many years. Hello, John.
Hello, Caron.
So pleased that you could join me for this first podcast. So let's introduce you. Tell me a little bit about your history as a director in your career, and also how you've been involved with the union over the years.
Okay, we'll take those two things separately. I'm a Scottish-based director, born and bred in Scotland, although I've worked a lot outside Scotland. I trained as a director. Well, first of all, I did drama at the University of Birmingham, then trained as a director at the Drama Centre in London. Then got various bursaries from the Scottish Arts Council, worked mostly outside the repertory theatre system. I've only done a few productions in repertory theatres. Most of my shows have been in independent theatres, touring right around Scotland. I ran a company, a Scottish Arts Council funded company called Winged Horse Touring Productions for 10 years. And then I've been mostly freelance since. And in the last 15 years or so, most of my career has been abroad, working with a whole variety of theatre companies and actors, professional actors in theatres right around Europe. But unfortunately, Brexit has put a stop to that. In regards to union activism, I've been a member of equity since I first started in the profession. So that's decades ago. I was a member of the Theatre Directors Committee for 33 and a half years, a member of the council representing theatre directors for 12 years, and then on the Standing Orders Committee, which runs the annual representative conference. I did that for 14 years. I'm currently a member of the Appeals Committee and a member of the online branch.
Indeed, the online branch, and being abroad, that's exactly what the online branch is kind of here for. Those people who don't have a geographical branch to attend. So you must have some wisdom in your years. So before we move on to our equity business, I'm curious, what wisdom and advice for early and mid-career directors could you kind of give? You know, sort of, have you got 3 points that you could sort of, what would you say about the industry now of people who wanted to go into directing with all your experience?
It's extremely difficult, but in terms of points, I will pass on the 2 points of wisdom that were passed on to me and which I found extremely valuable in all those years I've been doing the job. The first piece of advice I got is spend a lot of the rehearsal time on the beginning of the play, the last bit before the interval, and to the end of the play, because that is what the audience will remember. And that was very, very sage advice, and I passed that on. And the other piece of advice that was passed on to me, and I pass on, is that the most difficult and the most trying part of rehearsals for a director is the technical rehearsal, where everything focuses on you. Most of the job you have as a director is devolving responsibility and gradually making yourself redundant. So by the first night, the actors and the stage management, everything can do everything by themselves. You don't have to be there. And in fact, it's better if you're not there that often. You only come in from time to time. But the technical rehearsal, you are completely in charge. And somebody once said to me, make sure before you start the technical rehearsal, you've been to the toilet. Because if you take a break, you've lost it. You'll never get back on again. So there's another bit of practical advice.
So your tips. So with that advice in mind, what would you tell your 25-year-old self? What do you think the early stage of directors today looks like? Do you think is there similarities, or do you think things have changed a lot since you were hitting that age?
I think that there's less chance of getting official bursaries. I got a leg up by getting a Scottish Arts Council bursary, and that was helpful in introducing me to various theatre managements, who then took a chance on me at a later point. Although I say most of the chances I've created myself, but contacts are important, and that's something which isn't as easy these days, because nowadays you've got to be well funded in order to give yourself a break in the profession. It's the old question of upper class, middle class, working class, and if you're working class, you've got much less chance these days, simply because of the way that the profession is structured.
Yeah, so really important for all professionals working in the entertainment industry is being a member of the union. And the two aspects of the union is the industrial part of the union, which negotiates contracts on our behalf and with management, and there's committees that you mentioned earlier, and there's council, and there's the branches, the online branch. But there's also the part of the union which is your commitment and your agreement with the association that is your union, of what it is, who it is, why it exists, and how you function within the confines of that union. And that's really what we're talking about for this next part of this podcast. So equity business, what's happened this year? Well, things that you're going to hear, if you're listening at the moment, you're going to hear us talk about the ARC. You might hear motion 13. You might hear a resolution. You might have heard those outside of this podcast, and we're hoping to just cover over a little bit of what's going on at the moment in terms of the new proposed rule change that is taking place at the core of equity, and just trying to share with you just how important it is for us, and hopefully you'll understand a little bit more about why it's very important to you. So a little bit of context for people. Equity has a rolling schedule of activity, and one of the main ones is its annual conference. And that's when we get the chance as committees and branches to put an idea forward that will then get carried to a conference, heard by everybody present, and a decision about whether that's a good thing to pursue or whether we decide that that's not something we want to vote on. Very simplistic. But basically that decision to what question we put forward takes place every year. It takes place around about March. And this year, the online branch put forward a motion that became motion 13. The conference itself took place in May. And in the July, there was an election which brought into post a new council and a new president. In August, there was an announcement to the membership through the website and a newsletter that there was going to be a rules review. And for a lot of us, this was a new piece of information. That rules evaluation and proposed changes was announced in August, and the decision for us to read everything through is happening right now. So here we are in mid-September. So talk me through, John, that you and fellow union members have been grappling with right now. There's this resolution and a rewriting of the rules. What does it mean?
Well, what happened this time round for this major rewrite of the rules, because this is a completely new overhaul of the whole rule book, which hasn't happened for some time, is that the difference this time round is that before, all proposals by the council for major rewrites of the rules went to a special representative conference, which discussed them, looked at amendments, voted on amendments to those rules. So there was a lot of examination of debate of those rules before they then went to a referendum of the entire membership. This time round, still legally, but completely unprecedentedly, the proposed rule book is going to go to a referendum without being properly examined by a special representative conference. There are open meetings, which are about to happen. They start this coming week, over the next couple of weeks. But they are a sham democracy, because what happens there is completely non-binding, and the council can ignore what is said at those open meetings. And it's going back to how things were before the annual representative conference was brought in, whereby the council could ignore everything that the members said and just carry on in its own sweet way. So, that, you mentioned a resolution. Various branches and committees have had a resolution to try and get a special representative conference in addition to the open meetings. But the current General Secretary has taken upon himself to veto that process, despite the fact it's legal under the rules, and vetoed it before actually the council had a chance to debate whether the resolution should be taken into account.
Yeah, there's some interesting avenues for me going through this. On one sense, I'm going to think, well, if it hadn't have been for you, John, and some of the other sort of what I affectionately call rules wizards, who really understands the nuance of some of the rules as they change, and help, you know, members like myself understand whether we're within the rules and how we can work within them, and sometimes push those boundaries, because rules are there to be challenged. With something like an SRC, where would our authority come from to have an opinion on the rules? I think this is a thing for this rule book. They're working with a legal secretary or a legal advisor to tell them how the rules can be best structured. And the reason why we aren't having an input is because we would break the structure of the new rules which are within the law. That's one thing that I'm struggling with.
Right. Okay. The argument from the General Secretary, and I think it is a perfectly valid argument, is that the previous ad hoc rule changes, in other words, not a complete overhaul of the rules, but a piecemeal overhaul of bits of the rules, have resulted in our current rule book having contradictions within it. And he wanted to avoid this by having the equities lawyer work with him to get a set of rules which were of a piece, a whole which complemented each other. And he was worried that if there was an SRC, there would be amendments that would then not work within that framework. The resolutions that went in took that into account and asked for an SRC whereby the Standing Orders Committee would work with the lawyer to make sure that any amendments that were put forward were in line with the structure of the rules.
And why is it important that members attend an SRC, which would have been a special representatives conference? Because representatives that go to the annual conference are selected from the committees that have already been elected democratically by the branches, or if they're the committees that are industrially involved with the union, they've been elected by a vote of the membership. But in this instance, these open meetings, that it's turned into something where there isn't the representatives conference to analysis, that it's everybody's responsibility to keep an eye on this. And that's an overwhelming responsibility for members who, within a democracy, vote their representatives to act on their behalf.
Yes, can I just correct you on one thing you said? You said that representatives were selected by the committees. They're not selected, they are elected by the committees.
Yes.
So it's a completely democratic process right the way throughout to have people going to the a special representative conference or an annual representative conference and taking votes.
Yeah.
Whereas open meetings, anybody can just turn up if they can afford to attend them, because the two physical open meetings, one in London, one in Manchester, which are going to be the main open meetings, they have a much longer time span than the ones on Zoom. Those meetings are just going to be for the people who can afford to turn up, either because they live in either London or Manchester, or that they have the money to get themselves there. So it's the self-selected people that are going to be at those meetings, and they are not going to be represented in meetings.
Of course, because at the annual representatives conference, our hotels and our accommodation is paid for us to attend. Yes.
Yes, democracy costs money.
So I'm going to put a link in the description for folks to have a look at the Equities webpage that details this process that's going on. So it's all on there. I'll tell you the dates in a little while, so if you stay around for those. But the other part of the rule change is the shift in democracy, or the shift in power. And in a democratic environment, in a world environment, in our politic environment, it's always a battle of power. And there seems to be a line of power shifting within these rules. Am I right in that? Just tell us a little bit about the assistance you've been giving to the online branch members by looking collaboratively with a group of fellow members at the rules and some of the conclusions that you've shared with us, because they are, you've all put them together. They haven't been looked over by a lawyer. We are members looking to understand this ourselves. But what are the things that have highlighted for you in the process of going through those rules?
Well, as you say, I've very carefully been through, with other people, but very carefully gone through the proposed new rules and the existing rules and compared them as to the changes that are happening. And what is very clear from that, and it's not in the least bit subtle, is that many of the democratic checks and balances that are written into our current rules, imperfect as those current rules are, have been taken out to give virtually all of the power to the General Secretary and to the Council. More power for the General Secretary, more power for the Council, less power for the membership as a whole, less power for branches and committees. And what particularly concerns me is the two committees that were set up deliberately to be independent of the Council, the Appeals Committee, on which I serve, and the Standing Orders Committee, which I used to serve on, are both no longer as independent as they were set up to be under the new rules. Their procedures are now governed totally by the Council, and they become dog's body. Gosh.
And how does that differ? How has that power line shifted from the old rules? What makes it? What is the difference? If you can share that.
The difference is that the Council and the General Secretary have much more power. The General Secretary is not as responsible to Council as, or will not be as responsible to Council as under the current rules. For instance, just to give one example, the current rules require all financial transactions to be looked at by people elected by the Council, who are there to set a second check against the General Secretary. Now the new rules say that the General Secretary can do what they like, provided they work within the framework decided by the Council. So, in other words, the General Secretary can do something and then later claim that it was okay to do that because it was within the framework. It becomes a retrospective thing. Whereas in the days I served on council, I used to be a check signatory, with the General Secretary. And I remember querying certain checks, and quite rightly querying certain checks, because somebody in the accounts department had got their sums wrong. So there was always a check on things before it happened. That will disappear. Okay, we're no longer in the business of writing checks. It's now electronic, but the checks, balances, and safeguards within equity are disappearing.
So it's quite complex, and people will go, well, I don't, the finances of the union progress and rules change, so and rules evolve. So in terms of we've been pursuing the resolution to try and achieve a special representatives conference, and it was quite a complex process of getting 11 branches or committees to agree on a single resolution that we all voted on throughout all of our committees, where we have our branches and our committees with a specific number of people that need to vote to make those votes carry. That sadly on this occasion we found that it's not being progressed. Would we be able to use that SRC mechanism in the future if people realise that the rules that we've ended up with are not quite what they expected?
No, we could not, because that process has been entirely taken out of the proposed new rules. Okay,
so that is that's an interesting development. So where is the accountability of the executive and the elected members, we do elect them twice a year, but if something happens and the collective membership needs to take action, because there's 47 to 48,000 of us, if we wanted to collectively make a point that we're not happy with things that are going on, what would our mechanism be going forward to do that?
Right, I'll answer that in a second, but first I must correct something you've just said. The elections for council are not twice a year, they are every 2 years.
They leapfrog, don't they? Yes, so you have council, meetings,
council and president and the standing orders committee and the appeals committee are elected every 2 years, and every other 2 years the committees and are industrial committees and other committees such as the online branch are elected.
Yeah. And the clarity of the rules that members within the union who have got a legacy with understanding the rules and what's going next. It's not that there's an objection to change; it's an objection to lack of clarity.
It's not that it's an objection to change that is coming from people like me. I think change is a good thing, and I think that certain things in the proposed new rules are very good and are very necessary. Unfortunately, on balance, the proposed new rules as they are, I could not vote in a referendum for them. And I know many other people could not vote in a referendum for them unless they are considerably improved to improve democracy within equity. It's not the case that all power has been taken away from the membership. There are still possibilities for the membership, but they are much, much reduced under the new rules. It puts most things in the hands of the General Secretary and the Council.
So the avenues to take if you want to be having a conversation with equity, if you've listened to this podcast and hadn't realised what was going on, or you knew what was going on, but you want to get more involved, the mechanism for doing that is to find out where your local branch is. If you want to contact me on the email in the show notes and tell me what region you're in, and I can introduce you to a person, or if you are not associated with a geographic location and you want to join the online branch, you can talk to me as well. But those open meetings that are taking place, we've got one taking place this Thursday on the 15th, which is the London one. There is one the following Friday on the 23rd, which is in Manchester. And then there's a series of online open meetings. There's the UK Nations, 3 events during that day on Tuesday the 20th. And the England regions are on Thursday the 22nd. So hopefully that's given people a bit of an insight. As the last word, John, how would you like to summarize and share with people who have listened to this point? What would you say to them?
Right. Just to clarify and add to what you've just said, is that in regard to the open meetings, you can just turn up to the London and Manchester ones, provided you bring your membership card with you. With the other ones, which are on Zoom, you have to register for beforehand. So you need to go onto the Equity website, look the whole things up and register for them. So that is one way that you can make your viewpoint felt. The other way is and a productive way, is actually contacting your councillor, because there's a lot of new people on council, and frankly, they don't know what's going on because they have no history of involvement with these rule changes, but they have the power to do something about them. So if you're concerned about these rule changes, contact the councillors that represent you, lobby them in the same way as you would lobby your MP. And the third thing you can do is vote, is consider how you're going to vote when it comes to the referendum.
Thank you so much for that, John. I'm going to also put a link in the show notes to the councillors page so you can see who the councillors are, and each one of them does have a councillor's email address. So I think I will bring this to a close. I'm Caron, Lyon, a freelance producer and stage manager. I'm currently the chair and moderator of Equity's online branch. If you would like information about joining Equity or about joining the online branch, there is an email address in the show notes. And with that, I thank John very, very much for joining me for this very first Equity Special podcast.
Thanks.